Hi, here, Eric, I'll hang up with you and just talk through here for a second. Okay, so you should be able to share the webinar attendee link with any of your panelists that are attending virtually. And then, I've already got the recording.
Say that again.
Yeah, you should be able to, so any of your attendees that are, coming in virtually, there he is, or there she is. Are you the only virtual, okay, perfect. So I'm recording on my end. I'll mute, turn my video off, and you should be all set to go. So yeah, thank you.
But I can turn off my camera, right? But how do I make it so then it goes on the screen? Oh, someone's helping me doing the screen.
Okay, yeah, Erica should be able to help on that end with the screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but how do I get to see what's happening? Because I can't see anything right now.
Oh, because it's hooked up to my laptop, and my laptop, if I turn it on, it's just going to be me.
Right.
Unless I turn it this way. Yeah.
Okay.
This is
Well,
well.
okay. I can't even.
They're turning on the screen now. Once they turn on the screen, maybe it will enable you to see.
Okay.
I don't know exactly how it works. Thank you. How are you feeling?
I feel okay. I have tea.
Okay. So Professor Wang's speech and PPT are actually very good. He mentioned climate litigation. So either Feng's going to weave it in, or I might just mention a couple of points.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it seems like a shame to not include some of the points.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we have something.
Yeah, I wonder if it's. Do you mind if I go into your settings and see what that reached to find? What would it be? Maybe, no. Maybe, yeah, to a different HDMI. Oh,
Something's happening.
something's happening.
Do you wanna sit?
Oh, thank you.
Oh, did you see my email?
Yes. Okay, see, I don't know what's, the projector was acting weird in 31 too.
Try to grab the tech guy.
Yeah. You've been listening to me. I'm sorry, I'll mute myself.
Okay. No, it helps me know what's going on, so.
Amy, Laura, can you see the screen? I just shared the screen. You
Yes.
can? Great. So
Yes.
I'm just gonna do a little introduction and then,
That's great.
okay, just these 4 slides.
Okay.
Hmm,
So Tip,
Yeah,
I think if it is true that I can't see anything, which may be the case, I just would ask if you're asking questions just to make sure that I know what order we're supposed to answer in, and then note when you want me to come in, just because I won't be able to read the room.
yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
An additional monitor. You're
I've done it before once, but that's a long time ago. But you can figure help.
that's not what I wanted.
Usually it'll have like output or something and like,
Yeah. Normally what happens. It's odd.
hey, Google maybe.
Normally there's a little button that says extend or mirror displays, and that's generally what
Yeah.
happens in that sort of case, but I'm not seeing it right now.
I'm not crazy because I did go there and I was like,
Yeah.
usually this is how my computer will fix
Yeah.
it.
We'll get back to the Zoom call. Just make sure the settings is checked.
Oh. Wait. Do we need to click on this?
No.
Or maybe we do like share screen?
We just went straight from HDMI to HDMI, so. Oh, yeah, probably actually.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
I didn't even notice that.
Fire it. Fire it.
No.
Just fire me now.
There we go. Now it's looking like it's talking. There we go. Yay. Your dongle? Or?
No, it's ours.
Okay,
I'm just gonna walk out now.
okay.
Okay.
I'll let you drive from here.
Okay, all right, great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, let me see, how do I maximize? Great. So I'm gonna move this to the corner. Unpin, how do I unpin? Excuse me, sorry, we're running a little difficult, having difficult, how do I, how high self view? Okay, yes, I think I got it. Okay,
Okay.
great. Excellent. Thank you for coming. Can the panelists come up, please? Good morning. Thank you so much. I really want to thank the organizers for organizing this and also approving our panel. So I just want to introduce a little bit myself and the panelists. My name is Sue Tip Lamb. I'm the director of the U.S. Asia Partnership for Environmental Law at Vermont Law and Graduate School. Our program has been in existence since 2006. What we do is we work with our partner universities in Asia in developing programs to train the next generation of environmental advocates and also support institutional building, creating networks to help support each other in this environmental advocacy work, and also working on helping developing programs to improve the enabling conditions like laws and regulations. And so a big part of our work is also research and developing policies. So we have a project right now focusing on promoting just transition and public participation in climate governance. But the key thing is, what does just transition means? So this report that was issued by UNDP entitled How Just Transition Can Help Deliver the Paris Agreement. What does that mean? The green transition to a net zero future is key to unlocking the Paris Agreement. So here, so we wanted to actually look at what just transition means in different countries and give a different comparative perspective. So here we have a panel of set of panelists. I just want to also recognize Professor Wang Tanfa. He's a director of the Center for Legal Assistance for Pollution Victims at the China University of Political Science and Law. He was actually spotlighted as one of the heroes of the environment in the Times magazine back in 2007, because he has been a driving force in the environmental advocacy movement in China. And he actually had been at this conference twice before, and the last time was 10 years ago. So he actually apologizes that he cannot be here. And the time difference, he cannot even be online. So he apologized, but he did send us some pointers that I would like to maybe incorporate. But first of all, let me introduce the panelists who are, who's actually online. And yes, so Amy Laura Khan is the legal director of Taproot Earth. She is a community-based movement lawyer, and she collaborates with environmental, climate, land, food justice to support self-determination and shifting power. She was actually a visiting professor at Vermont Law School, and she was the director of the Environmental Justice Clinic. Next, we have a visitor from China, Feng Ge. She's a visiting scholar at Yale Law School. She's a practicing environmental lawyer in China and has extensive experience in environmental advocacy. In fact, she was one of the lawyers who brought the first public interest, environmental public interest litigation case in China. So I'm very happy that she's here to talk to us about transition lawyering. Then next we have Visa Zaidi. She is a LLM student at Vermont Law Graduate School. Before becoming a student at Vermont Law, she was a practicing attorney in India. And so she will be giving a perspective about just transitioning in India. And she actually has done a lot of work before the Supreme Court, High Courts, and the National Green Tribunal. And she also had been consultants for a lot of international organizations. And last but not least, Frederick Ikeyo. Sorry. He's a LLM fellow at the Environmental Justice Clinic at Vermont Law and Graduate School. He had 2 law degrees from universities in Tanzania and Kenya. And he worked for an NGO providing legal assistance and protecting human rights for traditional cattle herders and hunter-gatherers in Tanzania. So, and he will give the perspective on Tanzania. So without further ado, Amy Laura has been kind enough to join us remotely from Massachusetts. She's actually not feeling well today, so, but we'll have her.
I have a lot of tea. It's all right.
Okay, let me unshare. Great. So the floor is yours. Oh, sorry. So unlike the regular panels that I have seen in this conference, we would like to actually be more engaging with the audience. So we're going to be more, I'll be asking questions, and hopefully the panelists will give the answer. And I also encourage you to ask questions in the middle, cut in, please. So the first question is, Amy Laura, so as a transition lawyer, what does just transition means to you? And if you can explain a little bit of your work and what does that mean for you in terms of working on just transition issues?
Thanks, Sutip. I confess that this is the first. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's not connected to. Sorry, you're just coming out from my laptop to the room.
Okay. Okay, are we good?
Yes, very good.
Okay. This is the first panel I've ever been on. I've done hybrid panels, but I've never done a hybrid panel where I can't see anyone. Okay, there we go. That's much better. Hi, folks. So thank you so much, Sutip, for having me. It's great to be able to be a part of the conference and also work with my Vermont colleagues, even from afar. So as Sutip mentioned, I'm the legal director for Taproot Earth. We are actually a new organization that launched last year. We emerged from the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, which has deep roots in the Gulf South, founded after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and playing a role working on law and policy, supporting frontline communities that really solidified in the aftermath of the BP oil disaster. And we build power and cultivate solutions among frontline communities, advancing climate justice and democracy. So we support movement building efforts through law, policy, organizing, and international strategies, using facilitative leadership. And we are rooted in the Just Transition framework that was created by Movement Generation. We're also a member of the Climate Justice Alliance that brings folks together across the country and has roots in both the labor movements and also the environmental justice movement in this country. And so I say all of that to say, when I define just transition, I define just transition based on the definition that comes out of existing movements, environmental, climate justice, labor movements, and specifically the Climate Justice Alliance definition, which is, and I'm going to read it, and if I could put it in the chat for you to see, I would, but I don't know that works. Just transition is a vision-led, unifying, and place-based set of principles, processes, and practices that build economic and political power to shift from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. This means approaching production and consumption cycles holistically and waste-free, The transition itself must be just and equitable, redressing past harms and creating new relationships of power for the future through reparations. If the process of transition is not just, the outcome never will be. Just transition describes both where we are going and how we get there. And so to sort of parse that out, you know, and particularly in terms of what that means for lawyering, I think about it in terms of the power shifting element. And I think about it in terms of the lawyer's role as being consistent with what we think of as movement-based community lawyering, the law as a tool of a larger organizing strategy, the lawyer is accountable to frontline movements and communities who are most affected by the climate crisis. But it also means, you know, thinking about and engaging in strategies that are both, you know, resisting and repairing the harms of the extractive economy, the harms of dependence on fossil fuels, while also creating the new. And supporting communities with solutions that, you know, that center self-determination, that center community power, both at the local level, but also statewide, regionally, and nationally. And what that looks like, I mean, what that has looked like for me across the years of my career has looked very different. Sometimes I have been working at a very hyper local level to, for example, in Philadelphia, to support community gardeners and market farmers on issues of land access, land tenure, and land sovereignty. Community members who've been trying to preserve green garden and open space that was the result of abandonment and disinvestment, of racial segregation in housing policy. And communities that have been invested over generations in spaces that continue to be land insecure. So very hyper local. It's also meant supporting community members on issues of historic environmental injustice in different regions, both in New England where I've worked, but also North Carolina, Alabama through my work at Vermont Law School, where we're trying to ensure that federal agencies are held accountable to enforce their civil rights obligations by ensuring that, you know, environmental harms are not, you know, disproportionately borne by Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, and taking into account kind of historic the impact of the historic and current impacts of the fossil fuel industry. So, and right now, I think in the questions to come, we can talk a little bit about what we're planning for Taproot. For me, that means both thinking through our legal strategy and particularly looking more recently at issues of disaster recovery and equitable, you know, how to ensure that we are responding to the impacts of the climate crisis in ways that do not entrench injustice, but actually can be transformative for communities. While also thinking about how we connect lawyers and think about lawyers as a constituency where we can be in coordination, shared learning, and community. So with that, Sutup, I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thank you. And I would ask Feng if she would give us a snapshot of what China, her work, and also what just transition means.
Thank you. Thank you for all your coming and understand. No, the mic, maybe we didn't use it. We cannot. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Thank you for your coming, and thank you for Vermont Law School organizing this panel so we can discuss this new issue. Actually, the two words for me is very new, but the key mean for me is not new. You know, as I know, the key word for just the transition for environmental lawyers is we are not just the agents for humans. We are agents for nature. Yeah, That's what I understand, the just transition for environmental lawyers. But what kind of ways we can represent the nature? That's the challenge. So in China, we just find ways to represent the nature. Now I want to introduce one new system, which called environmental public interest litigations. This system just a new, which is enforced in 2015. But how this system can be regulated into laws? There is an interesting story that I want to tell you because I participated in this advocacy, the whole procedure of advocacy. So I worked for one environmental NGO named Friends of Nature in Beijing for many years. In 2012 to 2014, environmental law, environmental protection law. And China already just grow very fast. We just got economic success, we can say, but we just our environment, our nature just cannot support for more. So at that time, China just decide to use legal system reformation to just deal with the serious pollution and other environmental issues. At that time, we advocate that environmental NGOs should sue the polluters and governments on behalf of nature for the public interest. Actually, the exercise is the whole process was too long. It took us 2 years to add this system into the law, but finally, the legislature just adopt our suggestions to let some NGOs to sue polluters, but not government. But that's also very important for us. Through we call environmental public interest litigation as EPIL, we can call it. EPIL is one important tool to transit environmental lawyers representing nature, not only human. That's
Great. So it sounds like there's already a similarity in the because I think the term people, making up that term of just transition, but I think it actually is based on existing movements, like Amy Laura said, and like Feng said, they are already doing a lot of environmental advocacy on the ground on behalf of communities and NGOs. So next, we'd like to hear about the just transition issues in India.
Thank you. Good morning, I'm Fiza. I was an environmental lawyer in India, so I will be giving perspectives about just transition lawyering in India. So the one definition that really struck me when it comes to just transition is the ILO's, the International Labour Organization's definition, which talks about greening the economy in a way that is fair and inclusive as possible to everyone concerned and creating decent opportunities and leaving no one behind. So why I found this relevant was, so the way I am going to be talking about just transition, it is with respect to this issue of crop burning, crop residue burning in India. So what happens is that, so I have lived and worked for most of my life in Delhi, the capital, and sometime during October to November, the air quality index shows that the air quality of Delhi becomes really poor. It deteriorates due to several reasons. Now, during that time, a lot of litigation comes before the court, and the courts seem to take cognizance of the bad air quality. And it coincides, basically, this bad air quality coincides with a time where in states neighboring Delhi, such as Punjab and Haryana, which are the food bowl of northern India, there's a lot of commercial farming there, and they provide the crops to most of the northern part of the country. And during that time, because it is the time to sow new crops, so when they harvest the previous crops, they tend to burn the crop residue. And a lot of cases come before the courts saying that this causes one of the main problems of pollution in Delhi. Now, recent data, scientific data has shown that the stubble burning or crop residue burning is actually not really the cause of deteriorating air quality. Delhi already had very poor air because of various reasons: industries, construction dust, vehicular pollution, and various other factors. And this is actually a very episodic pollution or a very seasonal practice that happens. Now, in 2019, the court actively started looking at this issue of crop burning. They passed various orders. They were vacillating between different viewpoints. At one point, they penalized the farmers. At another point, and they said that the states where these farmers were burning crops need to take measures to ensure that this activity doesn't take place. And for me, this does not really embody the concept of just transition, because moving away to less polluting practices, okay, but an unfair burden was being placed on farmers who were not actual contributors. It was just 4%. Later on, data came before the court where the court acknowledged agricultural burning is actually 4% of the pollution. The rest of it's the other sources. And the court kept vacillating for about 3 years. It was finally last year that the court acknowledged that it's the other sources of pollution that are actually the major causes, and it is not stubble burning. Now, the court also acknowledged that agriculture is the backbone of the economy. The problem I feel here is that one is when a shift is being made to a greener economy, you have to take into account and reconcile science and the law. You have to take into account accurate scientific data. Lawyers can play a role here, because when a matter like this is being heard before the court, in India, actually, there's a system. So if there is a public interest litigation or a writ petition, we have something called continuing mandamus. So let's say an air pollution case was filed in the 1990s, and that main case has been disposed of, but a continuing mandamus is there that smaller interlocutory applications can be filed within the umbrella of that matter. Different air pollution, could be vehicles, it could be industries, it could be different things. So lawyers can now intervene with new data, climate, and do it in a way that is more climate conscious, not climate blind. And so now, once the court acknowledged that it's not the farmers, I think this is how there has to be a just transition, by ensuring, because has to be just, it has to be justice. You cannot just make, like, the farmers cannot just have an unfair burden placed upon them. Now, the other issue is that if during this short period of stubble burning, you decide, the court decides or orders that find a better alternative to this activity of crop burning, which, so there are
Oh, battery's dead.
I will come and get us a new mic.
Okay. So can you hear us?
Yeah.
Look, okay, the
Should-
battery's dead. So
should I just?
I think, can you hear us? Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I think now once while this has been acknowledged that the farmers are not responsible, if you if the court orders the farmers, or even if for that matter, you would want the farmers to move away from such practices, because they've been doing this for generations, for the reason that you have richer farmers and you have poorer farmers. You have poorer farmers who don't have access to machines. There are not enough subsidies or policies or programs in place by the state on the ground where they can have access to those machines. So you have certain machines like super seeders. What they do is they pull out the crop residue, they sow the seed at the same time. Then you have mulchers, you have balers, you have so many kinds of machines. So they basically take out the straw, spread it across the field, mulch it into the ground, so it sort of gets mixed with the soil. But there have been a lot of think tanks have, asked farmers and a lot of community organizations as to why they're not open to it. Firstly, there has to be political will in the state. But besides that, the local perception is that there's such a short season. If we don't get a machine rented in time and we don't have the resources to access the machine, how are we actually going to move away from this practice? And the correct way is to acknowledge that you can not to criminalize that particular practice, but actually find better alternatives to it. Another way that can happen is in a circular economy, a better way to find an alternative to it, which lawyers should advocate, and they can make policy changes also for it, and also give public awareness to community organizations, is that, let's say there's crop residue. It can probably be used in a circular economy in, let's say, a sugar mill, okay, to produce biomass energy, for ethanol blending maybe, to produce biofuel. Also, that incentivizes the way farmers would probably sell that residue to those industries. But the problem is the access to it. They say we don't have large sugarcane mills around us where we can sell this. So the government needs to have this organized system where you can actually, ensure that farmers have an incentive to not burn the crops, don't criminalize it, acknowledge the fact, acknowledge science, reconcile science and law. It's very dangerous to go before the court with such solutions. If it's climate conscious, it has to be backed by proper climate science data. And the other thing is that in a circular economy, if you propose these alternative solutions, which the court has, the government also has, the Commission for Air Quality has actually given a lot of advisories asking industries that we give you a certain cutoff date. So the Commission for Air Quality Management is actually not a court, it's a quasi-judicial body that has jurisdiction over the capital of Delhi and the national capital region where these farming states are located. It has given advisories saying that we are giving you a cutoff date. You please move away from coal and move to PNG or biomass fuels. But what happened is that a lot of industries wrote back saying we were already using sugar bagasse or rice husk in our sugar mills and rice mills. The Commission responded back saying that, oh, those are not biomass fuels. So if the farmers are given alternatives, there has to be parameters or standards set. What is biomass? What are the emission standards for different industries? There are blanket emission standards that were recently set in 2022, but you have to set industry-wise emission standards nationally. And also, first of all, define what biomass is. So I think that's where just transition lawyering comes in, for lawyers to go with informed data before the courts, advocate for such issues, be engaged in policy, either through consultancy work with organizations or otherwise, have networks, lawyer networks that can interact with community organizations, with NGOs, have legal awareness campaigns, sensitize the farmers. And it's all about change of mindset. It's all about, making the courts, making the people understand what better climate conscious solutions are. So I think that would be my take on it. Yeah. And I would now pass it to Fred.
Thank you. So my name is Frederick Oleikayo. I'm from Tanzania, East Africa. So I work with the.
Can you hear Laura? Laura, Amy, Laura. Yeah. Okay.
So I work with an NGO advocating for pastoralist rights and hunter-gatherer communities in specifically in the Ngorongoro conservation area, which is the northern part of Tanzania. And one, apart from human rights violations, one of the major issues that is being faced by these indigenous communities is climate change. And because, first of all, for the pastoralists, they depend on their cattle economy to provide for food and shelter and clothing and all of that. And the hunter-gatherer community, they actually depend on nature to provide for like hunting, gathering fruits, and provide for food for their daily sustenance. So one of the issues actually that with the climate change issue, one of the issues that the government is not really investing in these communities, and for the most part, what the government is tapping into is tourism and encouraging tourism because it generates a lot of revenues. But secondly, too, is that these communities are not being listened to, so they don't have a sense of control in the very environment that they live in. So, with that being said, what does a just transition mean to me, and with respect to also energy and relating that to the just energy transition? It means, learning actually from very, very same communities who are actually impacted the most. It means also, as lawyers, the knowledge that we have gathered and learned, also like teaching and incorporating those practices that fit into that community. Also, it means supporting this community in the transition to cleaner energy, but also making sure that it's done in a just manner. It does not result into more inequities. Also, it also means an extra burden should not be placed in the poor and the most marginalized communities. That can be the hunter-gatherers in Tanzania, it can be anywhere else in Tanzania, and it can be the pastoralist societies too. But also, what can be done in Tanzania actually to achieve this is to have distributional justice in terms of that benefits should actually mostly flow into these communities so that it does not impose an extra burden into them. You should have also procedural justice, that these communities should be listened to and what they say should be incorporated by the government. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
No, it helps.
It helps. Okay. So it also means that so distributional justice work and distributing the most benefit to the most marginalized communities. But procedural justice to it, that they should, at an early stage, they should be involved in all matters that actually affects them. So they should be that true and meaningful engagement, not just on the face of it, not just, because for instance, what happens is that, the government comes, says that it's engaging in this particular practice, but mostly what they do, first of all, you show most marginalized communities, they have, most of them are not going to school. They probably speak a second tribal language. So the first language is national language is Swahili. So they speak a tribal language. So the government comes, speaks Swahili or use scientific and technical language, which does not translate to the very, very community that they're trying to communicate. So there's no effective and meaningful feedback. But thirdly, also, looking from it from a restorative justice perspective, is that, as a whole, as a country, as a whole, as a continent in Africa, is that historically we have not contributed mostly to climate change. So probably 4 or 5% of global emissions, but the most affected communities are in Africa. And we actually bear the most and significant burdens of climate change. So for instance, just to put it into context, for instance, 2017, there was, so there's normally a pastoralist count for cattle in the Ngorongoro conservation area. So the 2017 count amounted to 70% loss of cattle in the Ngorongoro conservation area. They were dead from the previous year. So that just puts into concept how climate change plays, it's very impactful in most marginalized communities. So, restorative justice, that means that, globalized and developed nations should actually help and support developing countries. But also, The fourth point that I have is that intentionality. So the government should take, and there's two approaches to this, the bottom-up approach and the top-down approach. So the bottom-up approach is actually takes into account the procedural justice involving these communities, making them part of the process, having a seat at the table, and actually listening and actually addressing their concerns and issues. But a top-down approach also entails that the government should actually dismantle the systems that do not provide for that the system that is not inclusive. They should dismantle that system. So as we're actually attacking a system that we have a whole system, because if you take a bottom-up approach without dismantling the existing system that does not provide for inclusiveness, then that's another issue. But also it's also important to note that the economy plays also a crucial role in all these issues, especially in most developing countries, and in respect to Tanzania too, plays a very crucial role. For instance, if you look at the multidimensional vulnerability index, one of the issues there is the energy poverty. So most developing countries do not have access to cleaner and effective energy facilities. But what happens is that, so it involves a delicate balancing exercise that should we extract more coal to make money and develop our own countries? Should we invest to most, for instance, regions that has more income, that you can get money from industries or selling electricity and the rest? So it also involves a delicate balancing exercise. So therefore, the price of the economy actually trickles down to the affecting livelihoods and lives. So, so that's a important dynamics. And I think so that, what a just energy transition means to me is that there should be a meaningful engagement of all stakeholders, especially the most marginalized communities in Tanzania, and to make sure that there's a more equitable transition and no one's left behind. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thank you for giving the two examples from India and Tanzania. Some of the key issues that's addressed, the key issues that's actually affecting a traditional overburdened and marginalized community. And I think all of you, actually, the panels have covered some of this, but like, how do you actually address transition? Like, what kind of legal tools do you have, and what do you use to address these kind of issues relating to just transition? And what do you see is actually also the gap in the law or the policy that actually that if you fill those gaps would facilitate your lawyering in the just transition process? Amy Laura, would you like to take a first step?
I can try. So as you were asking this question, what are the legal tools to help facilitate a just transition? I think, and then where are the gaps? I think my immediate answer is, what tools do we not want to use? I think we're throwing everything at everything possible at addressing the impacts of the climate crisis, and also at every step there are gaps. Or another way to say gaps in the law is that there are structural inequalities that are written into the law. So that's just sort of overarching. And I want to think about it in terms of the tools available in three areas. One is thinking about and thinking about this sort of expansiveness in what is needed and what's available to us in these three categories. One is in terms of disaster response. Two is in what I was talking about in terms of the kind of resisting the bad, resisting the impacts, stopping the impacts of the extractive economy, and then also in terms of creating new institutions and shifting power through building, new formations and entities. And I wanted to start with disaster for a minute, just because we in this country, often in law schools, disaster law has started to, there's now sort of a curriculum of what is disaster law, and it focuses on the Stafford Act, which is the federal statute that kind of empowers FEMA to act when there is a federal presidential declaration of disaster, and that governs a particular way in which we respond to a set of disasters that are happening with increasing severity and frequency because of the impacts of the climate crisis, whether it's wildfires or hurricanes or floods, and you name it. And I will say at Taproot in particular, we as an organization that's rooted in the Gulf South, and emerged from Hurricane Katrina and the BP oil spill, both of which are in many ways human created disasters. The learning that we are holding in this space is that the response to the disaster law encompasses so many areas of the law, and the need to train up lawyers across a whole range of practice areas, but also listened to the experience of those lawyers across a whole range of practice areas, it becomes necessary with increasing frequency and severity of disasters. So just to sort of run through the litany of ways, areas of law that are impacted post-disaster or during disaster. Family law, what does it mean when you are displaced and you've got family members in different places, and custody issues and issues around property ownership. Our legal services folks are some of the folks who are working most hand in hand with people on the front lines. Real estate, land use, the list is, just think about our utility law. Just it becomes a very long list when you think about criminal defense. What is the impact of a disaster on folks who are currently incarcerated, and who is ensuring that the rights of the folks who are currently and the safety of the folks who are currently incarcerated are protected? Increasingly a huge issue, and we've seen some really kind of terrible impacts at that intersection. Reproductive rights, with there's a real intersection between the issues of climate justice and reproductive justice and access to healthcare, and healthcare law again comes in here. So education law, we saw the school system in New Orleans dismantled post Katrina, and all sorts of issues emerging there. So the tools we need, and even just in the disaster and post-disaster context, are legion. And then in the sort of category of, as I said, stopping the bad or resisting the entrenchment of an extractive economy, thinking about all of the folks who are supporting the efforts to in campaigns across the country to, as we say, keep it in the ground. So the pipeline fights to stop the expansion of the fossil fuel industry requires a whole host of folks in permitting fights around the country to then be working in coordination. It also requires folks who are coming at this to kind of defend the defenders. First Amendment and criminal defense in the protest context. And then in terms of the creating the new, we have all sorts of folks who are looking at things like worker co-ops, energy co-ops, community land trusts. And there's a whole host of transactional approaches that are needed and that are sort of a non-adversarial support for that just transition. Understanding what it means to be in front of a public utility commission and supporting communities to participate in that docket is hugely important as we think about how we want to transition our energy system towards more justly sourced renewables, for example. but also thinking about how we can support communities to institute microgrids. All of that requires specialized knowledge that we can translate and provide for our community partners. In terms of the gaps, I think at every stage, sorry, I apologize. At every, along the way, everything that I've named, there are gaps in the law. The three things that I would say come to mind for me, one is in the environmental context. One of the major gaps that we always point to as kind of critical for environmental justice is a failure to address cumulative impacts in the analysis of where we site facilities. So if in the siting of emitting facilities that have impacts on our air, our water, our land, if we are, through the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act, for example, only looking at regulating point sources individually without thinking about collectively what is the impact of multiple pollutants from multiple facilities on individual bodies and whole communities, we will not, we just continue to that in combination with systemic racism has resulted in the proliferation of such facilities in Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, and a failure of our environmental laws to provide the tools to address that. So I will say the Biden administration has taken some affirmative action to better incorporate cumulative impacts analysis where they think that they are empowered to. The state of New Jersey has taken one step further to say we have to address cumulative impacts analysis in our siting of a whole host of facilities. And if there is a cumulative impact on an environmental justice community, then we need to stop and deny the permit. So that, in the world of kind of siting of facilities, that's a major gap. I think to kind of close on this question, another major gap I see, is thinking about how we move, in the creating of the new, how we move towards more participatory democracy, for example, in our cities, and how we determine how resources and land are used. And I point towards an example in Bologna that has been experimenting with thinking of the city as a commons, thinking about public resources as commons resources. We in the US don't really, we are so very attached to our property that it is hard to kind of shift decision-making over property, even public property, to communities to decide, even if shifting that power and then incorporating a more participatory approach would have a reparative effect and could support a more just transition. So it's been a kind of block, and I'm interested if folks are interested to think about how we do that in discussion. I'm happy to come back to that.
Thank you, Iniwa. And how about Feng? And Feng, you already mentioned some legal tools, the equal environmental public interest litigation. Would you like to expand on that, and then also talk about other tools that you are aware of and gaps?
Yeah, in China, I think there are two important tools to transit lawyers. Yeah, one is public interest litigation. The other is participation in legislation. Yeah, like I mentioned before, we just participated in environmental protection law, the revision. That's very important. We got right or power to sue polluters. That's very important. So that tool is very important. The other tool is the litigation. Here, I just want to introduce one successful case, how lawyers and NGOs use this tool to stop climate change things. Here, about 5 years ago, a local environmentalist in Yunnan province, the west of China. And they told the media that the dam was going to flood a large area of tropical monsoon rainforest. The habitat, actually the forest is the habitat of green peacock. You know, we also know peacock is beautiful. Green peacock actually very endangered. In China, there is only 500 left. But the rainforest is the biggest habitat in China for the green peacock. Also, as all we know, rainforest also the most important carbon sink. Yeah, so we just report at first. We got this news. We report to the Ministry of Environmental Protection. We call it MEP in China. MEP just organized a meeting with companies, local government, and Friends of Nature NGO. The company promised to research this issue, but they didn't stop. The construction just kept going. So they will just cut all the rainforest soon. So we decided to took it into ourselves. So we filed lawsuits. But it was a new type of public interest litigation because it didn't just destroy the forest now at that time. It is preventive litigation. We are worried maybe that the court cannot accept this case. So we just collect evidence because there is little research about the green peacock and the rainforest. So we have to get evidence by ourselves. But there was natural forest, rainforest. There is no road to reach. We just have to get evidence by raft, you know, boat. But the river, the water actually very rough. We just organized six times to get evidences. One time, the director of Friends of Nature fell into river. Actually, that's very dangerous. Luckily, he swam very well. Yeah. If it was me, maybe I don't know. That's very, but it was worse. Finally, we got evidence. We recorded a group of green peacocks just getting food there, drinking there, mating there, and you know, rearing their young there. So the experts just want to prove, give our reports to the courts. So finally, the courts stopped the construction, and finally, the rainforest just still there, and the green peacocks still live there. We wish happily forever, but we have to keep an eye on it. Maybe, yeah, later it will change. But actually, before the court ruled the case, the company already stopped the construction under pressure of public and government. So, you know, something happened outside court more important than inside. As an environmental lawyer, we have to just use every tools possible to save our earth, our nature. That case, we can say a successful case because the Supreme People's Court listed this case as guiding case. That means every court in China should or shall refer to this case when they rule the similar cases. That's very important. So I just want to give an example. So use the litigation as a tool. We can just, environmental lawyers play an active role in saving our only home.
Thank you. I also would like to add Professor Wang Tanfa in putting some comments together. He also noted using litigation in climate change type of cases. One, he gave an example. There are two types that he was talking about. One is sort of a typical case and is very narrow, focusing on specific company. Like he gave an example of a electric company. They're under the law, they're required to purchase a certain amount of energy from renewable sources, and they did not do that. So that case is still ongoing. If they brought it, I think 2 or 3 years ago, it's still ongoing. The court don't know really what to do with it, but it's actually one way of addressing it, because the company, it's really not in the company's purview to decide where to buy the energy. So the government also needs to be involved. So that actually is just a demonstration example of a narrow, typical climate change, climate litigation. Another one he was actually raising is that, and that's actually something I think the different advocates are working towards, is more a broader atypical type of case, actually directing specifically on climate change, actually looking at climate change itself and just saying that the government needs to do certain things to protect the forest, to prevent deforestation. So that's actually an ongoing movement that he noticed. So I just want to share that with everyone. He put in a lot of work for this. And Fissa, could you please share with us some of the tools?
I think as lawyers, one very important tool is litigation, climate change litigation. So lawyers, but the one in India, the judiciary is a very strong branch of the government. It's a very proactive judiciary, and that places, I think, more responsibility on the lawyers to go before the court with scientifically informed arguments and ensure that they are helping and guiding the court in a direction that embodies the principle of just transition and ensures that this unfair burden is not placed on communities as it was done in the farmers. It took several years for the court to actually come to the realization that it was not stubble burning that was the main cause. A lot of leading think tanks in India, like the Center for Science and Environment and the Center for Policy Research, have said that this issue of stubble burning is actually decades of poor policy making, in the sense that it's a very, the courts and the government tends to react to then high exposure events and takes very ad hoc measures like diverting trucks to reduce pollution, suddenly making sure that smog towers are working. These are very ad hoc measures that don't really address the long-standing problem. So one is definitely litigation and taking informed arguments so that the court relies on correct data. The other thing would be lawyers engaging actively in policy making. Lawyers have the power to engage with communities on the ground, bring their voices, engage with the stakeholders, and bring those voices to the government and to the bodies that are responsible for creating the law. So in this case, interacting with the farmers on the ground, seeing what those issues, those implementation issues are, why they are not open to moving to machines, why is that happening, and also bringing those before the government. And also we have pollution control boards which set those standards and pollution parameters, interacting with them actively. And lawyers, by having a network or as a group after besides engaging these organizations, can sort of help organize capacity building and training and awareness programs for a lot of these pollution control boards and for officials, local government officials who are responsible for implementing the law on the ground. The other thing is, I feel like policy, we don't have a climate change based statute. For that matter, even our statutes are not informed by the principle of just transition. I think lawyers can help bring about that change and ensure that, in the change happens and in the interim, a certain community is not adversely affected or unfair burden is not placed on them before reaching a viable solution. So I think that is one other thing. And besides that, lawyers, I think, should engage in more community awareness programs, more education, even like, I think incorporating this in law schools more, making them more aware about it, that's so important. I mean, it gives a lot of perspective to people going out into the legal field eventually. And yeah, I think these are some of the key tools. Besides this, lawyers helping identify the gaps and the policy and helping provide recommendations on how to fill those gaps to the government. It really helps because, the law is a tool that can really, help shape and help include this principle of just transition well into the current legal framework. So I think, yeah, that would be.
Thank you. And Fred, you mentioned earlier that for just transition, to you, it means meaningful engagement. What kind of legal tools is available for that engagement? And what are the gaps?
So, so first of all, I just like to say that in the outset is that Tanzania is not just transition framework. Also, we have a national policy 2012 just trying to address climate change and bring all the sectors together, the governmental sectors. But most importantly, I think so, in order for lawyers to provide for just transition, I think so we should, as lawyers, we should be more creative in using the current tools that we have to provide for just transition. So for instance, in Tanzania, we have the Environmental Management Act, which provides for rights to a health environment. I think so we can be creative in doing that. We need to invest in the most marginalized communities that in order to provide a clean environment, because in reality, what is happening on the ground is that the most marginalized communities are actually facing a lot of pollution in regards to air pollution, for instance, because we mostly depend, like my community mostly depends on firewood for cooking, charcoal. They depend on charcoal, so so that results into a lot of deforestation and cutting down trees. So investing, cleaner energy and technologies to these communities, I think is very key to transitioning and actually capping it to clean environment for Tanzanians and being creative to argue that in the court of law. I think so it's very important. But mostly importantly too is, the irony of it is that we are, Tanzania is bearing, the disproportionate impact of climate change, but still, I think so our legal universities and colleges and education system should, I think that they should make climate change and law, for instance, a core subject that has to be taught in these institutions, because especially even for lawyers coming out of universities and colleges, prospective lawyers or prospective judges to be in Tanzania, they're not thinking consciously about the climate and how it implicates every sector of the country and the economy and lives and livelihoods. So I think so having that and having it as a co-cause and training, I think so will be a movement that is very necessary and much needed, especially as a country and as a continent. But also the concept of the current pool of lawyers who have not actually trained in that regard is actually also training in that aspect, and actually also training lawyers to partner with communities and work with communities in regards to power shifting and self-determination of communities, and actually making communities identify grievances, solution, how they need the solution to be. And because that makes the community plays an integral role, and lawyers come in to complement that process by playing a collaborative role in the process. So it actually makes the community an integral part of that. But just to mention, there's a pilot study that is being done in South Africa. It's called the Just Energy Transition Partnership. And I think so there are very key lessons that we can actually learn from that as a continent and as Tanzanians. And actually amplifies on those issues of distributional, procedural, restorative, and intentionality. So for instance, it established a presidential climate commission, which makes the president a central role in that process because it brings all the departments together. But most importantly, it has a broad representatives of the most marginalized communities in South Africa as they're trying to address the transitioning away from coal, because South Africa is a major country that produces coal. I think so it ranks number 6 worldwide. So the second lesson that we can actually learn from that is also engaging stakeholders at an early stage, and actually the JETP, so the Just Energy Transition Partnership in South Africa also amplifies that. So we can actually learn that this involves engaging stakeholders and communities. Also the key aspect to it, and sometimes this is mostly lacking in Tanzania and some of the African government, is that there's no transparency in the accessibility to the process as a whole. So I think so amplifying transparency and accessibility, principles is very key. And again, the Presidential Commission, Climate Commission in South Africa also amplifies that issue. And also just in that, transparency and accessibility, this also means that, making documents, making the process easier for community to understand on the ground, and, not using technical and scientific language that the community cannot understand. But lastly, and most importantly, and this is also happening in Tanzania, unfortunately it's happening in Tanzania, is that, there's lack of political coalition in that social complex. So, I haven't seen, working for an NGO, I haven't seen that coming together. So for instance, here in the US, big environmental organizations come together to actually address these issues when they need to do so. And I think so, building the political coalition and social impacts, I think is very key. Thank you.
Great. So I'm hearing a lot of themes here from even different countries on focusing on addressing climate just transition issues. One of the I'm hearing a lot is that litigation is one really useful tool. And also, and I think Bong said it, and also Amy Laura said it too, is using everything you have under the sun, media, campaigning outside of the courtroom, and also using and putting the focus on justice in all aspects of substantive law to help disaster relief, disaster victims, and etc. So, and also, I think, and Fred and Fisa talked about more being more creative, and also community awareness, education. So I actually would like to open it up and actually welcome your contribution to this discussion. What do you have specific questions for the panelists, or do you have any comments about just transition lawyering? I think this, can you say your name and then, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Connie. I work at Earth Justice. I'm from Houston, Texas, so largely from space. I'm hearing a lot of like litigation as a tool, and I think that that's, in my experience being a lawyer here, sometimes depending on where you're at, you have a pretty compromised judiciary that's not looking to rule in favor of marginalized groups. And then also what I heard is like engaging policy making, make sure lawyers are culturally responsive to the communities they're working with. I know in the United States, environmental lawyering has been very white, very affluent historically, and that perpetuates oppression of a different kind of marginalized communities. So I'm wondering, like in y'all's countries or in the experiences y'all have had, how does that look? Like clearly the racialized system in the United States isn't the same, or could be the same. But how do those injustices from lawyer to community play out, and how y'all, and then what does that look like in a just transition?
Who wants to take on this question?
Sutip, can you repeat the question? Because I didn't hear the whole question.
You know what? We should have the mic. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. And hey, Amy, Laura, we know each other. I was asking, when in the United States, when we have environmental lawyers who a lot of the times do not match the communities that they're advocating on behalf of, under just transition framework in y'all's countries, have you seen that kind of inequity also from representative to community? And if so, how are y'all training lawyers to either combat that or to tease that out?
So the question may be more for the experts from the different countries.
In China, we are different from US. Different. Historically, NGOs and society are weak in China. In China, lawyers and NGOs have to work together to push forward. It was difficult, and it will be more difficult, maybe. But people, environmental public interest education can be a powerful tool to push forward. I mentioned one successful case, but we have more failures. I didn't mention actually a lot of difficulties and challenges. For example, one case about soil contamination. A lot of students just got sick because they are neighbors of a brownfield, contaminated field. So we filed litigation, but the court refused us and let us pay the court 1.89 million to them. So why? Because the local government won't reuse the land, although contaminated. Seriously, they want to reduce the land to build more buildings and sell. So luckily for us, at the second trial, we win partly. The court said the polluters should pay the pollution they had just caused, and they also pay the NGO's lawyers' fee. But as government was just taking some actions to remediating the contaminated land, so the polluters, 3 chemical companies, didn't pay the fee actually. But the government just put 1 to 2 meters soil among the contaminated land. It doesn't work, you can see. So we just will keep pushing the local government to do more things. You know, EPIL, this is a new system. We just studied from US and EU. When I was a student, I just wrote my paper about EPIL. That is 20 years ago. Yes, but there is no cases in China, actually. I just researched the US and EU. 20 years, not 20 years already passed. We just make progress. Yeah, we all, my colleagues and I already filed 50 cases against the polluters. Some of them actually take some successful progress. And we will file more cases. Although we need more money, more staff, lawyers to work. And we will just keep going.
So, yeah, just transition in China seems to be like, you know, development versus communities. That's how I feel that's how it comes out. But how about from other panels?
So in the Tanzanian perspective, I'll say it's follow the money, and especially in the, unlike the US where there's probably, the ratio black and white or studying facilities in communities of color. In Tanzania, also you can look at it in the context of, tribes, and who will, mostly Black country, but at the same time Africans, but at the same time we also look in the context of tribes. So I can probably pin it to that. So you look at that, you look at who's the most dominant tribe, and who's the most, who's making the most government, who has the most numbers, who's the most educated, and who, for instance, who is the most business, for instance, like business, because there's, for instance, the Chaga, most business. So you can also look in that context. But also in the judiciary, separation of powers, once you look at it like that, you see the executive branch having more influence over the judiciary. And so, for instance, if there's a say in the judiciary branch, in the executive branch by the president, then it's so hard for instance, for judges to, to go beyond that and say no. And so, they follow through that, they follow suit. But so, follow the money, for instance, you look at the, for instance, just to put it in context, you look at the politics aspect of it. For instance, in Tanzania, there's no, if you want to take the politics route and address these issues, for instance, in the parliament. For instance, Tanzania, you cannot stand as an independent. So for instance, if a member of parliament wants, for instance, in the Ngorongoro conservation area, wants to address this particular issue, and the government has a different opinion, if they strip that member of parliament is parliamentary seat from the political party, because you can only vie for parliament through political party. So if they annul your political party candidacy, then automatically you're not a member of parliament. So from that aspect, you can see that, if there's contravening views, opinions on that, then we cannot address it. But separation of powers, you look at judges, mostly the executive has an influence on the judiciary branch. And you look at the laws, for instance, in the Ngorongoro conservation area, you see that most ministers, the chief conservator is actually appointed by the president. And you look at it, you do some scrutiny, you look at it, you don't see members of that the Maasai community actually forming and being part of that process, just to a very limited extent. So what is actually coming out of there is actually not very representative of the community itself. So follow the money and the economy, how it plays a role, for instance, and those power dynamics.
Okay. Yes. Sorry, Emilio, do you have anything to add in response? Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think the question was more directed outside of the US. So
Okay.
also, hi. Hi, Dorleen. So it was good to, I dropped out for a second, but it was good to listen to all of those answers. It's a great question.
Well, thank you so much for the discussion this morning and for traveling here for this. I really appreciate it. My name is Tanya Sanrab. I'm with a national NGO, the Center for Biological Diversity. My question for you all is, are you aware of resources or tools that help bring these concepts of global equity into just transition? The Tanzanian speaker mentioned, obviously, disproportionate effects. And for me, from the US, obviously, whether we talk about biodiversity loss or the climate crisis, my country is a major consumer and one of the largest contributors. How do we take that and embody it into just transition? I do more biodiversity work, and I always say, it's not enough for the US to do our share. We have to do so much more because historically we've done so much. And guess what? We continue to do it. But we didn't talk a lot about that, but I'm interested in sort of what exists as resources for us as activists, especially in developed countries, to make sure that not only are we doing a just transition in our countries that takes into account our local communities, but also recognizes that extra mile we have to go because of historically what we've done.
You want to take my question?
That's a very good question. I think so. I'll just start with the political will. I think so. It's pretty much lacking in that context, and also like just taking an extra mile. You look most developing countries, for instance, Tanzania, for instance, we have a lot of debts, national debts. So if the political will, for instance, is there, and the political will is there to transition to just energy transition, and there's a just energy transition, for instance, framework that actually tailors to the Tanzanian needs and communities in Tanzania. Then, for instance, there's something like debt for nature swaps. You can use that and actually tailoring to specifically the country should adhere to the just transition energy partnership. So I think so that's one way to to look at that. So I think so political will is very much needed, and actually just addressing those issues. But I don't know if Emil already have something or
I think political will is very important. Politics definitely plays a very important role in India to do that, both at the central, the state, and the local governments, and at the village level where the panchayats are there. Besides this, when you talk about global equity, I think reputational pressure also plays a very key role. We are party to the Paris Agreement, yes. So there we have those NDCs in place. So I think that reputational pressure and just showing that how we are meeting those goals that we have set. And I think that sort of pressure from the international community as well, that I think also plays a very key role in including that. So I think while the national changes have to take place, and these measures have to be taken to ensure just transition within the country, but it also has to, sort of see the bigger picture with respect to what our pledges are under the like the international agreements that we are party to. So I think that would be how it would probably take place. Yeah.
Great question. Yeah, that's very important. I just want to say at 3 levels, that's big question actually. I just want to say 2 more. One level is the international level. Yeah. United Nations also are important. Yeah, objective or also. Yeah, we can just advocate UN to take more maybe agreements on other tools to push cooperation between nations. That's another way is the national level. At national level, I think as our environmental lawyers, we can just advocate the government to take everything they can do. Just like yesterday, the president of Earth Justice mentioned that, advocate government to do everything they can do. Yeah, everyone can do that. Every lawyers can do that. And another at local levels or society levels, I just wondering if we can just organize environmental lawyers union, international level. So we can just think about it. I think we can do more things together. Cooperation is very important. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Yeah.
Right.
Just
Okay.
yeah. Just one last one. Before I pass it to Laura. I think it's also like the international funding mechanism, like the IMF and World Bank. I think also can play a crucial role in putting pressure, especially in the foreign context, and making sure that having a place such as energy transition and making sure that particular communities transition in a just and equitable way in respect to their particular countries. Pass it to Amy.
Hi, and I think I get the gist of the question. I don't know that it got repeated, but what I'm understanding the question is what is the responsibility of countries in the global north relative to the countries who in the global south who are most impacted by the climate crisis? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, what kind of resources and tools is available to U.S. advocates and in understanding that the U.S. actually had a exploitative past.
Gotcha. So, all right, I'm heading in the right direction. So I mean, one thing that I will start by saying is that, so I was part of a group of advocates, organizers, and scholars that launched the Just Transition Lawyering Institute last year as a pilot program, and with 60 practicing lawyers in the US. And it is a project that will continue. Taproot itself is launching the Just Transition Lawyering Network in April to bring together first attorneys in the US, but I think we are building relationships globally to come together across region, sector, strategy, to be in coordination, community, and shared learning in a way that's accountable to our frontline movement. So I think creating those structures for shared learning and coordination are really, and organizing ourselves is really needed. And the curriculum for the Institute and the curriculum for the Just Transition Learning Seminar that I'm teaching right now starts with rooting ourselves in the history of colonialism and racial capitalism. We as lawyers, regardless of what practice area we're working in, need to understand root causes, and I think have a shared vocabulary around that in order to be creating shared solutions with our frontline partners in whatever region we're working. I think the two things that come to mind, I'm hearing Fred talk about debt, and I'm thinking about the the loss and damage mechanism, you know, the agreement for a loss and damage mechanism that came out of COP27 last year. And I'm thinking about the solidarity across regions that took that it took to get to the point of an agreement for a loss and damage approach, and also the kind of movement building that's going to need to actually that will be needed to put that into place in a way that doesn't reinforce the kind of debt relationships that exist currently in global south to global north. So that's one thing that comes to mind. Another is that I think, you know, within the US and globally, we really need to take on climate migration in a way that is meaningful and in a way that honestly our current you know, our current laws in the US, but also our, you know, our international human rights laws don't currently, you know, are not giving us currently the tools to face what is going to be and what is already a global crisis. So that's just the tip of the iceberg, but I feel like those were the thoughts that came to mind.
I think this is the, so I just want to also add that thank you for the panelists for this, and this is actually also a selfish little panel for our project. We actually also want to work on collaboration with other countries and just kind of learning from them of the issues that's going on, and then also sharing experience that we can both learn together and advocate for justice. So thank you for the panel. Thank you, Amy, Laura.
Sorry.
Hey,
Thanks, Tip.
can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you. Am I being
No,
broadcast?
I can't hear you now.
Oh,
How come I can't hear you? Can I unplug?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, are you
Oh.
there? Yeah, now I can hear you.
okay.
Thank you so much. You're
Um,
so good.
Sure.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
yeah, really appreciate it.
Um,
And feel better soon.
Thank you so much. All right, take care.
Okay, yeah, bye-bye.
We didn't have time. No, no fatheads, sorry.
must